Alright guys, check this out. Remember when we made this video calling the ETH bottom on March 8th, 2025? Well, turns out it wasn't the exact bottom, but it was pretty darn close. Like the actual low hit just a month later on April 9th. So if you started to stack ETH around that time, then you'd be up more than 2.5x right now. You're welcome. Anyhow, as for me, I'm more bullish on ETH than I have been at any time during the past 2 years. And with ETH making its way back to 4K once again, I figured that now's the perfect time to share with you my updated bull case, which includes 7 reasons why I'm all in on Ethereum right now. Alright, let's start big picture with the macro backdrop. You see, even though the macro environment isn't amazing right now, it's a hell of a lot better than it has been for a good while. For example, we're getting close to rate cuts by the Fed, maybe even more than 2 if Powell caves to public pressure. Plus, the dollar has been weak all year, with the DXY dipping into the 90s for the first time in 3 years. So that's exactly the kind of setup where money starts to flow into riskier assets, such as crypto. On top of that, stocks are still near all-time highs, with the S&P and NASDAQ both pushing record levels. So as long as equities stay strong, crypto and ETH have room to run. Finally, even if the Fed is not cutting rates quite yet, you still got the central banks of Japan, China, and Europe all adding more liquidity in their own ways. So bottom line is, ETH historically thrives when liquidity is flowing, and that's exactly what's happening around the world right now. Anyhow, the macro tailwinds are one thing, but another big tailwind for ETH has gotta be the regulatory clarity happening right now in the United States. First off, we had the Genius Act recently passed, which finally gives stablecoins the clarity they've been desperately waiting for. And here's the thing, with over 50% of stablecoins issued on Ethereum, this is a clear win for ETH by extension. But also, you got the Clarity Act, which is a game changer for the entire crypto market. The key thing to note here is that the Clarity Act straight up recognizes Ethereum as one of the few blockchains that are both mature and decentralized. So that's a huge vote of confidence, and it gives institutions the green light to finally get involved. That's why you're seeing the likes of MasterCard and JP Morgan rolling out their own stablecoin initiatives. And let's not forget, Trump recently announced that he wants to open up the US retirement market to crypto. So if that actually goes through, we're talking about trillions in new capital that could flow into crypto, with a huge chunk naturally going to ETH. But honestly, maybe just the most welcome change is the fact that the anti-crypto army in DC, aka Elizabeth Warren and her crew, has finally backed off. Just a couple years ago, ETH researchers like Danny Ryan were getting harassed by government agencies, and they weren't even doing anything shady or illegal. So now, with all that pressure off, Ethereum finally has the freedom to compete and innovate without looking over its shoulder. Alright, so we got macro and regulations all lining up. But do you know what this really means? Well, it means that institutions and corporations can finally join the party. You see, institutions aren't risk-loving degens like we are. No, they need to feel safe. Like they need that green light before deploying their resources and capital into a space like crypto. But now, the tides are finally turning. I mean, just look at Fidelity. They recently put out a report that straight up calls ETH a store of value. And then you got all these treasury companies popping up trying to become the MicroStrategy of Ethereum. The 2 biggest names right now are SharpLink Gaming and Bitmine Immersion Technologies. These guys are literally in an arms race, stacking ETH like their lives depended on it. Bitmine even said that they want to acquire 5% of the entire ETH supply, which would be crazy. Now, as for who wins this race, I have no idea. But here's what I do know. They already hold more ETH than the Ethereum Foundation, and they're actually diamond-handed. So this kind of long-term holding can only help ETH's price, right? Also, I want to talk about Tom Lee for a second, as he's the guy behind Bitmine. If you don't know, he's a legend on Wall Street and in crypto. Back in the brutal 2018 to 2019 bear market, while everyone was calling for Bitcoin to drop even lower, Tom Lee was saying things like, the fundamentals look great and the bottom is in. And guess what? He was right. But anyhow, recently he's been on CNBC hyping up stablecoins as the ChatGPT moment for crypto and explaining how every big firm launching their own stablecoins will naturally want to buy ETH to secure the network. So point is, when Tom Lee speaks, Wall Street listens. And that's why there's a whole new wave of demand flowing into ETH right now. But anyhow, if you want further proof that the appetite for ETH is real, then look no further than the ETFs. You see, lately the ETH ETFs have been absolutely poppin'. There's been days where their inflows have surpassed the Bitcoin ETF inflows. In fact, there was a day where the ETH ETFs raked in over 700 million in net inflows, blowing past their previous record. To put this in perspective, these ETFs are gobbling so much ETH that it often dwarfs the daily ETH issuance by a factor of hundreds to one. But here's the real kicker. BlackRock recently filed to add staking to their ETH ETFs, and a lot of experts say that it's probably going to get approved. So if that happens, ETH ETFs would instantly become one of the hottest assets on Wall Street. Why? Well, because it means that they could get a piece of that staking yield just by holding the ETF shares. And let's be real, Wall Street loves their yield and dividends, right? So who knows, maybe if this all goes through, we'll even see the infamous crypto hater Warren Buffett finally pick up some ETH ETFs for its own portfolio. Alright, now, if you've watched my channel at all before, then you already know I'm a fundamentals guy through and through. But how are Ethereum's fundamentals looking lately? Well, it's looking good any way you slice it. For starters, Ethereum recently rolled out their Pextra upgrade, which made their network more scalable, efficient, and just easier to use. But don't take my word for it, let's just look at the numbers. Daily transactions are now pushing all-time highs, with the network handling over 1.5 million transactions per day, which is right up there with the 2021 peak. Their validator count is also at all-time highs, now with over 2 million validators. And also the amount of ETHs being staked is also at all-time highs. So with all these great fundamentals, it's no surprise to see that whales are starting to accumulate ETH on chain. I mean, heck, I'm stacking ETH too, and I'm just a small fish compared to those guys. Alright, but I'm not done yet, because it's not just the fundamentals. You see, ETH's technicals and charts are looking absolutely gorgeous too. First off, ETH has had all the momentum lately. It's outperformed Bitcoin and Solana over the past few weeks. If you check out the ETH BTC ratio, it really looks like we've finally seen a bottom for this cycle. But here's where things get really interesting. If you look at the others ETH chart, which is basically altcoins versus ETH, that's been dropping like a rock. In other words, if you want altcoin exposure right now, you might as well just hold ETH instead, while this others ETH ratio is in free fall. On top of that, ETH has been leading the entire crypto market in global perps volume, which is quite impressive. But I think the best part about all this is that ETH still has room to run per the MVRV metric before it hits the historically overvalued zone. And lastly, if you're into technical analysis, then you're gonna love the bullish harmonic pattern forming in the ETH BTC chart, because that suggests that ETH could outperform Bitcoin, not just for a little bit, but potentially for an extended period of time. Phew, that was a lot of points to consider, huh? But hold up, because there's still one more reason to be bullish on ETH, and that has to do with the Ethereum Foundation. You see, for the longest time, the Ethereum community was pissed with how the foundation operated. They hated that the EF would just dump their ETH on the open market. And they hated that the EF lacked urgency while other projects were catching up. But now, things are different. The EF is under new leadership, and they've changed up their treasury strategy. Instead of dumping on the open market, they're now selling over the counter to long-term holders, such as those treasury companies. And furthermore, they're now putting their ETH to work, like staking it in DeFi protocols and generating yield, which is something that the community has suggested for years now. And then lastly, you got Etherealize, basically the unofficial second Ethereum Foundation, stepping up to represent ETH on Wall Street and in Washington, DC. So, point here is that what used to be a sore spot for the Ethereum community has now become another big reason to be bullish on ETH. Alrighty, so as you can see, there are a ton of reasons to be bullish on ETH right now. And honestly, I'm about as max long on ETH as someone can be. But I'm not saying that there won't be some bumps along the way, as corrections do happen after all, like the one we just saw recently. But I'm still confident that the top for ETH this cycle is somewhere in that 6,000 to 8,000 range, which is why my plan is simple. I'll just keep buying the dips whenever they show up. But what about you though? Are you as bullish on ETH as I am? And also, as the bull market heats up, do not forget the power of a solid community. I'm a part of Retail DAO, a group of savvy and supportive retail investors who actually help each other out. If you want to join us, we would love to have you. Just check out my link in the description.